This Friday, January 15th. He disappeared somewhere around July 27th, 2014. His half-brother, Jason Stevens, will be the guest, and Noah disappeared from Ringgold, Georgia. Now, if any of you know anything about this disappearance, you know there's been some controversy regarding Noah's disappearance. It didn't start when he went missing. It started in 2018 when, this is my understanding of it. Okay, this is my understanding. That The Vanished, hosted by Marissa, I already see somebody writing about that here, Eileen, did an interview with Noah's other half-brother, Josh Wright. And Marissa caught a lot of crap for that because there is a group out there, a certain segment of the population that knows about Noah's disappearance and thinks that Josh very well could have had something to do with his own half-brother's disappearance. We do have to remember, though, that it seems, according to the paperwork from Georgia, that Josh was in jail at the time that Noah went missing. We just have to keep that in mind. The reason I'm choosing, though, and I'm not going to talk about Josh, in my interview with Jason, we do talk about Josh, but only in the interactions that Jason has had with Josh since Noah went missing. We do not talk about anything regarding any interviews that Josh did with anybody else. But I will go on the record now, being that this is my show, that there are reasons that I chose not to interview Josh. Okay? And it's not necessarily because I think it had anything to do with his disappearance. Okay, like I said, he was in jail at the time. But anytime we have anybody on the program, we want to make sure that we are certainly 100% for sure not interviewing somebody who could have had something to do with the disappearance. Because why? Because that makes it less likely that that person, of course, is going to tell the truth. Okay? And being that there does seem to be a segment of the population that thinks that even though Josh was in jail, but he could have done something through other people, that's enough for me to start thinking about, well, how are we going to handle this? But there are other reasons as well. To the interview that Marissa did with him almost 3 years ago now, back in 2018. And then also listening to the interview that John Lorden did with Josh once again in 2018. The fact is, Josh isn't a very good interview. He's just not a very good interview. I think Marissa is a fine interviewer. I think that John Lorden is a fine interviewer. And neither interviews would I, and that's not Marissa's fault. That's not John's fault. In fact, I have no qualms about either of them. But the interviews just aren't very good because Josh has a hard time answering a question directly. He just does. That's why his conversation for John, for example, went 3 hours. They had to split it up into 2 different videos. That's not John's fault. That was Josh's fault. Now, I know I do 3-hour interviews, but I think after it, I think everybody comes away understanding a disappearance much better. Whereas with Josh as the guest, even myself, who has really looked into this, comes away more confused than ever. And I surely don't want my listeners, Unfound listeners, to come away from the episode more confused than ever. So I can't have somebody like that on the program. Even if the person surely 100% and there had nothing people who can't get the information across in a way that people can understand. It's better off just not to do the interview. So instead, what I chose to do, and I knew about all of that happened in 2018. So luckily, I was able to get in contact with Noah's other half brother from the other side of the family. Noah and Josh share a mother. Noah and Jason's share a father. And so that's why I chose to do an interview with him. There's nobody out there that believes that Jason, there's no anything. Jason surely had nothing to do with Noah's disappearance. And on top of everything else, Jason is much more straightforward when you ask him questions about Noah's disappearance. So that's why I chose to have him on the program instead of Josh. And I realize Josh has been out there. I know that he's, in fact, I would say that he's monopolized the entire topic. And I have to admit, I just thought it was chance maybe to give somebody else a chance to talk, especially somebody who can answer the questions more clearly. What I found about Josh is that he may eventually get around to answering the question you asked him, but before you get there, he's going to tell you about how he surely had nothing to do with Noah's disappearance, and he has an integrity, and he's going to tell these things all about himself, and then he'll get around to answering a question about Noah's disappearance. And I'm just not interested. I'm not interested in doing that kind of interview. That's not what we do here. And once again, I'm not blaming Marissa. I'm not blaming John. I think probably in hindsight, maybe they wouldn't have done things the way they did them. I don't know. I'm not sure that they knew what they were necessarily getting into when they chose to have Josh on the programs back in 2018. Because even myself, when I found out about Noah's disappearance, I had entertained the idea of Josh being on the program, although I've never spoken to him. But as soon as I heard about the interview that Marissa did, and I heard about and saw what happened with John's show, I was like, I don't think I can do that. And in addition to the fact that, I don't like covering disappearances right after other people have covered them. So it gave me time to kind of think about it. And I just came to the conclusion, no, I can't have Josh on the program. Can't do it. It's nothing personal. It's just, in my expert opinion, having interviewed about 230 people now, that Josh would not be a benefit for the program and would be not beneficial in helping you learn about Noah's disappearance. That is always the standard. Anybody who's ever been on the program, ever, that is always the standard. Eileen says Marissa's interview was rough. I don't think that was Marissa's fault. Ruth says Noah's case is sad. They're all sad. Delane, don't they have restraining orders against each other? That comes up in the interview. I'll just let Jason talk about that, Delane, in the interview. Ruth, Josh Angle detracts from the case investigation. Eileen, Josh goes off on the rails. He talks about himself all the time. At the end of everything, you end up knowing more about Josh than about Noah. That's kind of my assessment. Kathy, agree 100% about John's interviews with Josh. Ruth, but I do want to say this for the record. I have been in talk with Jordan Lorden, and I want to thank him for, being that he now has about 2.5 years to look back at Josh, and I would never say what John said to me off the record. John has had an opportunity to look back now at the interview that he did with Josh in 2018, and he's kind of conveyed to me, what his attitude is, 2.5 years later, and how he looks back at the disappearance and looks back at talking to Josh and everything else. And once again, I'm not going to get into what John said, but I want to thank John for giving me his insight, for, telling me, what kind of was going on at the time and why he did things the way he did them, and what he thinks that he has learned since 2018. I think that was May of 2018 when he did interviewed Josh. And so that was very helpful for me in trying to craft out what I was going to do. And in addition to that, not only have I talked to Jason, but I actually got to speak to at least 3 people who saw Noah within those last few days before he went missing. And I think that is much more helpful than having Josh on the program. These people, I got to speak to them. No different than last week when I told you about speaking to Jeff, Amanda, and Detective Rizk. This week, after the interview, I will get to tell you about my conversations with 3 people that Noah saw before he went missing, and I will tell you what they said. And I think what you're going to find out is that at least in one of those situations, maybe things, the timeline that is out there may not be true. So there's that. Drew says, Josh wants you down a rabbit hole and the investigation needs to bypass Josh and look elsewhere. Delane, hard to watch and listen to his interviews. I don't think you have enough patience for interviewing Josh. I have a lot of patience, Delane. If somebody's answering questions directly, I mean, when it comes to patience, I'll do 4-hour interviews and I don't feel bad about it. I know everybody else seems to be real set on only doing hour-long programs and everything else. I'll do a 4-hour interview if that's what needs to be done. So my patience that way is fine. But you're right in the fact of me asking a question and the person taking 10 minutes to answer it before getting to the answer. Surely not. Surely not, Delane. Eileen reminds me a little of Steve Pankey. Having interviewed Steve Pankey, I think Steve, although he very well may be guilty and killed I always want to say Janelle Matthews, but he certainly answered questions much more directly than Josh does. Certainly. There's a reason. I mean, Steve's interview was 3 hours long, but I think there was a lot of content in there. Although Steve certainly did talk about himself, I think we covered everything that we had to cover, and I think the interview was worth 3 hours. Ruth, Josh is a circle talker and most don't have time to interview a double talking narcissist. Eileen agrees. Kathy agrees. Ruth, Jason will always be way better to get to know about Noah. Cheer. Oh, awesome. When the missing persons community comes together to discuss ideas, really helpful for the families. Yes. Delane, John, and Danelle seem to be a good job of collaborating. Yeah, I did watch that too as well, Delane, regarding the discussion they had afterwards. I have not spoken to Nell, though, but I have talked to John. Of course, John and I kind of know each other, him inviting me on his game show last year, which was a lot of fun. So I had to talk to John, and once again, he's been very helpful in me, once again, seeing another point of view from a person who has a lot of experience in this area. Eileen says Steve stayed on track because you kept him on track. Well, I appreciate that. So once again, this Friday, the disappearance of Noah Davis, communication breakdown, and I'll explain a few different reasons why that's the title of the episode. Somewhere around July 27th, that's still up in the air, 2014, his other half brother, Jason Stevens from Ringgold, Georgia. Controversy regarding it. We really don't get into that. But Josh does get mentioned in the interview, but only what he was doing at the time, because Jason and Josh did work together on Noah's disappearance after Noah went missing, and then they had a split. We talk about that. Other than that, Josh really is not mentioned that much at all in the interview. That's all because just the concentration is on Noah, not anybody else. So that's what we got going for this Friday. But what did we do tonight? Talked about the car show. Talked about some stomach thing I had going on today. Mega Millions and Powerball, which the drawing should be happening right about now for Powerball. Disc golf this past weekend. I do not have another tournament until the end of this month in Orlando. Talked about the TJ Murray poll. No newsletter until February 1st. No newsletter January 1st. Dr. Telesco, map analyses, thanking True Crime Junkies for mentioning Unfound, Jessica Haringa and Tara Grinstead. Unfound on the Ground was this past Monday. Talked about DB Cooper for the new Loki show. Took a bunch of great questions and then finished up with talking about this Friday's episode, The Disappearance of Noah Davis. 2 hours. action-packed. I love to do it. I don't know why more other podcast hosts don't do live show, because I love doing this. Such great discussions going on, such great questions, a little bit of humor here and there. And it was a great show tonight. Thank you all so much. Patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. /Unfound Podcast. PayPal.me/Unfound Podcast. Please like this video before you leave. Please subscribe to the channel. And you'll hear me Friday. Good night.